Hey guys, Ricky here, owner of DoDContract.com. The US government is the single biggest purchaser of goods and services from small businesses, and they buy just about everything. If you want to discover what your niche is, see how much the government's spending in your category, head on over to DoDContract.com. We have lots of resources there, depending on what your budget is and where you are in the process, to help you find your way through the government contracting process and start closing those 6 to 8 figure government contracts. Now, on with the show.
Well, hey everyone, Ricky here with DoD Contract Academy, and today I'm very pleased to bring you Fraser Kitchell. He's the CEO and co-founder of KEF Robotics. Hey Fraser, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Can't complain, can't complain. I know we just talked about you wearing a hat versus me wearing a hat, and really cold where you are. So I just kind of sharing. Guys with shaved heads have, I guess, some similar.
Hey, that's kind calling my head shaved. I'm just a balding guy, and I'm in the first floor of a warehouse in Pittsburgh. It's something like 17 degrees out today. So,
they say men that go bald have more testosterone than men that don't. So that's I can have better leadership quality. So that's
I think about that a lot.
I would send that article out actually every unit I was in the Air Force just to kind of get a rise out of people, but. Whether it's true or not, I can't speak to it. But hey, no, it's great. All kidding aside, it's great having you on here. And I know just from a brief conversation before, Brian Stream, who we've had on the podcast. And you guys are, when I look at your contract, you have some similar success stories and some great wins. So why don't we start with what is KEF Robotics? What problem you guys are trying to solve, and what are you doing in the world?
Okay, great. Yeah, so I usually describe KEF at a high level as we're trying to use cameras to fly aircraft. So we're an autonomy developer. We develop software to fly other people's aircraft using specifically cameras. So that's different than some approaches. We're a passive sensor. We're kind of like that. We're replacing the eyes of a pilot, and we're trying to move some of the intelligence of a pilot on board the aircraft. So that's kind of our niche. We were founded 4 years ago. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of the business. And it's our general thesis is that aerial autonomy is very hard to develop. Even large companies like primes will struggle to develop it. Even if they can build great aircraft, the autonomy problem is quite different.
Right.
And then we also believe that cameras, if you can extract data from them, are a really great sensor to use. So they're challenging to use because they actually bring in so much data, and then you have to interpret it with algorithms. That's challenging, but that's kind of where we live as a company.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so we've got kind of the snapshot of what you guys are doing. So let's take it back, right? So I've got at least your LinkedIn profile up in front of me here. So I mean, it looks like you have a really great past history, Carnegie Mellon. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, coming out of school and your experience, in the world, and what led you to create KEF.
Yeah, absolutely. So KEF, we have our name because it's Carrie, Eric, and Fraser. They're just the first initials of the 3 co-founders' names. Yeah. And prior to founding our business in December of 2018, I think it was, we all worked at a research and development group within a space robotics company. And for that space robotics company, we were working on algorithms to allow spacecraft to land on the moon or on unmapped bodies of the solar system. So, so that's through that, we actually started using drones and kind of using cameras as well. Prior to that business, I always tell people I'm not an engineer by training, and I'm not a roboticist. And I went to Carnegie Mellon for grad school to study energy science. And I discovered, if you know Carnegie Mellon, it's a robotics and artificial intelligence hub. And I discovered robotics while I was walking down a hallway, and I saw a poster about saying Carnegie Mellon's going to the moon. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll just drop in on that class for a day. And I knew within 5 minutes, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing going forward. Like, forget about energy. I'm going to be working with roboticists, and this is what I want to do. I want to have like an adventure basically with my career.
Yeah.
So just going back for, listeners, just to inform people, like I was a biologist before that. So I got a biology undergrad degree. So I was in the sciences. I'd worked for a mechanical contractor doing energy systems for buildings. So I was working with engineers. And my role in KEF is to manage our engineering team and try and guide our strategy and make sure we have a good product market fit.
Okay.
So none of my educational background kind of led to that. It's just sort of something I found my way into.
Okay, fantastic. It's funny, just listening to you talk about like removing the pilot from the aircraft. As a former navigator, that was the first half of my Air Force career. I'm all about taking the pilots out of those aircraft. I watched so many pilots try to kill me over those years that I'm a big fan of this. So all my pilot buddies will send me emails after they listen to that. But no,
Yeah,
what you're doing is amazing, and there's a huge need for this, right? And there are a lot of different efforts right now, autonomy related efforts, especially when we're talking about flying aircraft. And I don't know if you get into swarm technology or any of that stuff that we've been hearing about. But as we start moving forward, you have this kind of epiphany with robotics, right? And then eventually you start KEF, and you guys all, it sounds like you guys all work together. When you made the transition, did you start the business before you left? Did you start it afterwards and then just go full force? Or
yeah, we worked together for something like 4 years at that prior business, and we had a lot of really cool successes. The biggest probably accomplishment I point to is we won a NASA Tipping Point Award, which was a $10 million award to develop terrain relative navigation to land a spacecraft on the moon. So if you know how we land spacecraft on the moon, typically you just sort of know where you are in orbit and you start firing your thrusters and you land, and you have this massive kind of ellipse that you might actually land in because you're not doing much navigation or guidance as you go down to the surface.
right.
So we were developing techniques so you could use a camera and you could look at the ground, and if you don't have GPS around the moon, you can use that camera to reestablish your position as you descend.
Sure.
So we could take that error and bring it down to like the size of a football field from the size of like a couple kilometers long.
Oh, that's awesome. And
So
like terrain mapping feature, is that kind of
yeah, so basically we know exactly what the surface of the moon looks like. The moon's actually pretty easy to do this on because there's no clouds, there's no weathering. The lighting's very predictable years in advance. So here's so basically we were developing those algorithms, and the way you develop those algorithms on Earth as a low budget, space robotics company is you find an analog to a spacecraft and you fly it a bunch and you develop the algorithms. So the closest analog, the cheapest analog, is to fly a drone. And we're using cameras, we're flying drones, we're turning the GPS off because we're not going to have GPS on the moon.
Right.
And we're like, well, let's see who's doing the best work in this field. And as we kind of came to study it and know it more, we're like, well, you think we might be doing some of the best work in this field. And long story short, as you can imagine, when 3 people leave a company, there's a little bit of friction there. So we had some friction with our upper management.
Sure.
I was actually on the upper management in that company, but we're like, why are we doing this for somebody else? Let's go do our own thing and not have the thing kind of sitting above us. So we started, the first thing we did was we're like, okay, we're a small business. Nobody knows us yet. We've got to get on the map. So we entered into a Lockheed Martin sponsored competition called Alpha Pilot.
Okay.
Which you could point your readers to, but long story short is that was highly publicized. We qualified in first place going up against all these other teams in the world as a team of 3, and I can't code. So it was really 2 software developers. And that got us on the map. We were in the New York Times before we were 100 days old. And
awesome.
We just we parlayed that into our first DoD contracts with special operations, actually with SoftWorks.
Okay, awesome.
And then we're off and running. So now we support SoftWorks, the Air Force, SOCOM, DITRA, Army, a whole bunch of DoD partners.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see you get a lot of contracts here. So getting into, so you have a kind of a non-traditional, I guess most companies, small businesses don't get the benefit of kind of being in the New York Times and a lot of the publicity and stuff going into it. How was your experience getting your first DoD contract, with SoftWorks? Is that something you found and you applied for? Did they reach out to you? How did that work?
Oh man, so it's like being in the right place at the right time and just getting a little bit lucky and also just sticking our necks out. So we knew that our technology was mostly applicable to the DoD. We don't really actually, even to this day, believe in the commercial drone market.
Okay.
We don't see a lot of people using autonomous drones. We don't think the FAA is going to let you do that. So we somehow found out about Special Operations Command. None of us are DoD background. We heard that the best conference was something called SOFIC, which happens in May, which that was about 6 months after our founding. So we reached out to a few people before we went down there, got some meetings lined up, showed up and just started telling our story. And actually, I went on a tour of SoftWorks. So SoftWorks, if your listeners don't know, is like a very open kind of nonprofit that's aligned with SOCOM, very easy to do business with. And they gave so the head of SoftWorks gave me a tour, and at the end I said, "Can I get 5 minutes of your time?" I told him what we were working on, and he said, "Write me a white paper." And we wrote him 2. We sent him over the weekend.
Oh, that's awesome.
And something like 6 weeks later, we were on contract.
Okay. Interesting.
So, and it's not an SBIR. It was a direct contract from SoftWorks. And we just happened to be developing a tech that they had been trying to field. They tried to find commercial providers for years.
Right.
They had done a big down select. This was before KEF was even founded. One of the teams that they down selected to dropped out. And so we just, we're in the right place at the right time, signed that contract, and now we're on contract number 4 with them.
That is very unusual.
Very unusual.
So for everyone listening, don't expect to be on contract that fast with the government.
No.
But I will say special ops, like within acquisitions. So I spent half my career in acquisitions, the latter half. Traditional acquisitions, as you probably went on to discover, typically takes a long time, at least a lot compared to commercial timelines. But the special operations units, and we work very closely with them on rapid like prototype development, technology, different things like that, LPI, LPD, whatever the thing of the day is. But they can rapidly put something on contract. And of course, they should be able to, right? Because you have a guy out in the field that he needs something right now. They need support, right? So they are very good about finding what they want and getting what they want and getting it on contract quickly. It's unusual. It's very it's specialized and unique within DoD contracting. So that's awesome that was your first experience with that. So now I did see some SBIR contracts under your belt in the federal system here. So when did that come into play?
So I think our first SBIR was through AFWorks, and this is another, like, every one of your listeners who's trying to be a small business should be talking to AFWorks, is my opinion, and SoftWorks.
Yeah.
So AFWorks, they release a open topic. They select, they're looking for non-traditionals. They give you low dollars to get your foot in the door with the Air Force. So we probably, along with literally 400 other companies, won a phase 1 SBIR from AFWorks, probably at month 9, 10 of our business.
Okay.
And obviously aerial autonomy, we're somewhat aligned with the Air Force, even though we're talking about very small aircraft versus their large aircraft. And then so from that phase 1, we ended up getting a lot of meetings with people in the Air Force, and we got a phase 2. The phase 2s are large. I think ours was 1.5 million, which for us, it was like that could support our whole team for 2 years at that point.
Yeah.
And then we've now collected some SBIRs from Army Applications Lab, which I believe is under Futures Command. So that's another fast moving group within the Army.
Right.
Amazing turnaround time from submission to selection there too, something like 10 days.
Yeah.
The award took longer. We have an SBIR with Chem Biodefense, which is under the Army. That's a phase 1. That took quite a long time to close. That's more like traditional SBIR. Probably took 9 months from selection to award. And then we actually do have some commercial contracts now as well. But generally, we've just stepped our way through the SBIR process. We knew it well from writing NASA SBIRs at our old company.
Okay.
So we kind of had, Carrie, Eric, and I are very dialed into how you write a compelling SBIR and how you get to know the TPOC, the technical point of contact, before you write. So you don't send anything in blind. You don't hire professional writers. You do it organically. So yeah, we probably a little bit more experience than most young companies had there. But I still feel like if you know the rules of the SBIR world, you can be highly successful. You can have a 50-60% win rate.
You bring up something I think that's extremely important, and I'm not sure that we've talked about it on the podcast before, which is when you actually start getting into the solicitation writing. There's a bunch of businesses out there that you could hire, and that's what a lot of businesses want to do. They want to go out and they want to hire someone to write the solicitation for them because they feel like either they don't understand the process or they don't have the time. But in what you just alluded to, and what I've seen, whether it's with my clients or on the Air Force side, on the government side, is that if you have to write a proposal, whether it's for a SIBR or anything else, nobody understands the technology and your company better than your company. So a proposal writer, and if you've done this before, you don't need them, but what I think a proposal writer can do is maybe say, hey, this is the structure of a proposal. This is what a compliance matrix looks like. But even if you hire somebody, if you want a product that makes sense at all, you're putting in almost the same amount of time, because you still have to write out all of the technical work. You have to be involved with the pricing. You have to be involved with that process. So I think you're right. I think writing it yourself, my advice is always write it yourself, and then maybe get someone, if you need someone to review it just to make sure that it, hits, you understand the fire clauses and things like that. That's great. But
Yeah.
So you mentioned that. So writing it yourself is writing a compelling proposal is what you said. And you mentioned talking with a TPOC beforehand. I'm not sure we've discussed that on the podcast before. Maybe you could tell me why you would do that, who they are, and why that is important.
Yeah. So it's our general belief that almost every SBIR is written with I hate to even say this, but this is just my belief, so I will say it. So a lot of times the TPOC, the technical point of contact, has been made aware of a technology need from somebody inside the government who's probably been has some teams already in mind that they know can provide that solution. So it's our opinion that oftentimes those solicitations are written, and unless you're sort of the one that seeded that idea in the minds of the people on the other side of the fence that you don't get to talk to, you don't have a really good chance to win the SBIR. So a really good way, and a company, you're all about minimizing your effort, or like really streamlining your effort. So you can't submit 20 proposals. Your business would go under. You have to submit a few and hopefully win most of them. So you should be immediately, when the topic's released, finding out who's associated with that selection or that kind of guidance of those proposals to the selection committee. And you need to be talking with them verbally on day one, hopefully, about what you're doing. And you should be reading between the lines of the feedback they give you, which they can't give you explicit feedback, but am I going to be able to write a compelling proposal here?
Yeah.
And so if you're not even talking to that person, then you're probably not going to win. You're just going to be an anonymous company that's developing a tech that they know nothing about.
Yeah. So that is really interesting. We talked a lot about the maybe the official way, of writing a proposal based on a solicitation. And what I tell everyone listening, and I tell my clients, is you got to live in the market research phase. So I tell them, don't even respond to a solicitation. Typically you're looking for something like a request for information, sources sought, some way of finding out about that opportunity ahead of time. And then you're in that office and you're talking with a program manager, and you're talking with them so they know who your company is, so you can shape it. And so they know who you are, right? And I mean, I've said before, like, I didn't always get to hire the company that I wanted to as a program manager, but I almost always knew what company I wanted to hire. Just to speak to your point about SBIR, right? So even though I typically talk about regular acquisitions, with the SBIR process, it's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, it's a little bit different, but in the sense that the SBIR, the SBIR office is typically a different office than, the users or a traditional acquisition shop. But all of those topics come from somewhere. So when the government wants to do something with autonomous flight or vertical lift aircraft, right? Somebody in the government gave them that technology request, and different government agencies want SBIR dollars to fund what they're doing, so they all kind of compete for what these topics are going to be. So You're right. I think that's something people need to think about is you're right. There's definitely companies talking with the user agencies about what they have. And a lot of that's going to shape, what they're requesting. So now you have that SBIR office and they're aware of that. So that's actually really great advice is going in there, talking with them, letting them know. And and like you said, you're probably going to be able to get a sense of whether or not that is even worth you applying for, because they probably will.
Yeah.
They'll probably give you enough between the lines for you to understand if you're competitive or not.
Yeah. So I'll tell you guys a story that we had recently. So we had an Air Force, or we saw an Air Force SBIR come out that looked like it couldn't have been written for KEF, like it was almost like we wrote it.
Yeah.
They wanted a company to come in that had a mid TRL technology readiness level capability to do terrain relative navigation. They wanted to do a no hardware upgrade of an aircraft. That's what we do. We basically take your existing camera, we make our algorithms run on that. And it had all these specific things that were like, oh, this is great. But we were nervous because we hadn't seeded the topic. And we know there's other teams out there that are competitive. And we're like, okay, well, the fact that this came out, like we'll write to it. We did write to it. We wrote a really good proposal and we had a great prime that was going to give us, hundreds of thousands of dollars of free flight time on a range of aircraft, like a really strong proposal in our mind.
Yeah.
We didn't get selected. And we weren't entirely surprised by that because out of all the teams that, KEF, we could write a really compelling thing on paper, but unless they know us, this is still a human to human business. They're not going to stake their $1 million on this unknown team or this small team when they have somebody who's maybe 80% as compelling a proposal, but they're a known commodity.
Yep.
So that's just one parable, but it kind of brought home to me, like, even if you're the perfect team with the perfect tech, don't expect to win unless you've done something. And that doesn't make me upset. Like, I want the government to know their winning teams rather than just select it off of a written proposal, because I think that's, you have to be playing the technical game and the business development game to win.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to organize on all those multiple fronts. So
was that a phase 1 or phase 2?
That was a direct to phase 2.
Okay. Sounds like, so with a direct to phase 2, just for anyone listening. So I guess one of the big differences is money. Of course, phase 1 is usually lower dollar. Maybe you owe a tech, a tech write-up or something, but you're really, after a phase 1, you're looking for someone in the government to sponsor you. And that's one of the requirements for phase 2, right? You need somebody usually in the DoD, it would probably be someone at like an 06 level, maybe a GS, higher ranking government civilian, but someone that can, on the government side, that will at least sign a memorandum of understanding saying, hey, if you're recommending a demo, then maybe they give you a space to do the demo. If they're, they might be providing some type of facility or some hours to donate to what you're doing. Usually it's not funding, but sometimes it is. How has the process been for you finding sponsors for phase 2?
So the Air Force is, I would say, pretty easy to break into. One thing the SBI, our office, did under AFWorks, which was smart, was they gave you this small dollar phase 1, but it was an actual contract. And they tell you what to say to the people you're reaching out to. They say,
right,
I have a contract with the Air Force. Can I get 10 minutes of your time to talk about the technology I'm developing to get a letter of support for phase 2?
Yeah.
For the contract that we had that did progress from a phase 1 to a phase 2, we had something like 9 meetings in 90 days. And actually probably even more than that, probably 15-ish meetings.
Okay.
Some of those were in DC, some of those were in Dayton, Ohio. So we're based in Pittsburgh. We drove to both those destinations. Some of them were, this was pre-COVID, but some of them were remote meetings. So we ended up having a pretty compelling phase 2. Those letters of support, I imagine, were the make or break for us as far as getting moving forward. So there was, a somewhat compelling user need that we demonstrated across broad.
How many so you had more than one sponsor for that?
Yeah. So I think all told, we had something like 4 letters of support that, 9 people were kind of on board, but actually organizing everybody to get their letter in on time. I think we ended up with 4, which was still not bad. The minimum was 1 at that time. I don't know.
That's probably one of the more painful parts of the process is now you're getting into the bureaucracy of just just getting a signature from, somebody can take weeks, if not months. So getting the
Exactly.
right approvals, getting it to be on the right person's desk, and they want to make a change, and it goes back and forth. So, that's great, and that's something for people to think about too. Is maybe, hey, don't just stop when you have that letter of support or that MOU. You can go and get letters of support in addition to that, where people are going to sponsor your technology. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of Brian Stream's interview, where he's flying to people's retirement ceremonies and like going all over the place, getting his sponsors and everything. So just not stopping with kind of the minimum, and to keep going. And it's worth it in the end, especially for a phase 2, to help you to what you're doing.
Brian's stream, if your viewers haven't seen that podcast, they should go back and watch it, because that guy is better at getting access to people than anybody I've ever met. I mean, he is so good at finding email addresses for Air Force people. His reach is really impressive, and he's really figured that part of it out.
Yeah, when I get a lot of questions about that episode, and a lot of people bring it up, and there's part of the interview, if you go and check it out, where he talks about, because he was doing part of this during COVID, and he talks about just renting. It sounded like renting a little cottage on a lake in New Hampshire, locking himself in there, and just like going to town on LinkedIn and all the other methods he had to find the right people. And it was just his job to find sponsors and and he, like I said, he was doing the work. And obviously you guys did the work too. So it's really incredible. And I think it's a good example of, what it takes to get the right people to sponsor you on something like that. But I mean, look, you're saying, hey, you could be 50-60% successful on some of these, and that is not the odds. If you look at all the people, right, the odds are actually, much lower than that. You don't just win by making a submission. You really got to put the work in.
Yeah, I think roughly we think blind odds 10%. So that means you have to write 10 proposals to win one. And if you're talking phase 1s, you're writing 10 proposals to make $125,000. That's like $12,500 average per proposal. That's just barely going to cover your costs.
Yeah.
So
I would say 10% is being generous, actually, unless you're approaching it from a position of, I'm going to put the work in. I'm not just winging this and slapping it together last minute, which you guys really aren't. And especially now, you add to that, reach out to the TPOC, right, or somebody at the office that's going to be reviewing these. And by the way, and I think another good reason to do that is, not only are they getting to know your company and you're getting to know some of the background to see if you're competitive, but they are also potentially going to give you some information that is not included in the solicitation. And government solicitations are notorious for not giving you the whole picture. Because look, everyone's busy, right? So if you're writing a 3 or 4 page solicitation for CIBR or anything else, you're going to get some of it in there, but you might not know so it might maybe some essential details that you need to know, that you need to understand about who the customer really is, or what their objective is, and you can start including that in your proposal, and now you're really going to be hitting the mark in a place somebody else isn't.
Yep, absolutely.
Not to exhaust the topic, but any other, anything else that you think about when you're trying to write that compelling proposal?
Yeah, so this might be obvious, but commercialization is more and more of it's a need in the government, right? Everybody's being more fiscally responsible. You need to have and everybody wants dual use technologies, because that's how we'll stay competitive and not have this tech, just go to the military and have them fund everything. You're watching cell phones developed by commercial markets. Every other technology that's commercialized, we're among the world leaders in. If it's not commercialized, we're way behind. So for drones in particular, they want to know how you're going to make money outside the government if you're going to be selling them drone technology. So, from the beginning, the biggest companies we can possibly find that will talk to us for a half hour and provide a letter of support for, our general developments for drone autonomy. That's critical. So I can't name names, but I'll just say, like, very large shipping companies and very large logging companies. And like in this current push I'm on right now, I'm reaching out to oil and gas companies. The biggest I can find in the US. We're trying to get letters of support, or even just get like talking points from these people that we can say, this is the market that we're going to be addressing alongside the DoD. So that's pretty upfront for most people, but those letters, they can be turned around quickly. You shouldn't be afraid if you're a small business to call up, somebody on LinkedIn or shoot them a note and try to get their stamp on your approval and your check as well.
That's really great advice. Actually including that with your proposal, not something that a lot of companies are doing. And you're right, commercialization is extremely important. And we just had an episode on, because we've had a lot of companies, especially technology companies, get their start in the SBIR program.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest complaint or roadblock or struggle, I guess I would hear is, SBIR can take you so far. It gets you to a certain point, right? And there are a lot of companies that have won a lot of those type of contracts. And it sounds like you guys have regular contracts as well, kind of keeping you along. And there's a need. In some cases, it's the government programs of record and funding hasn't caught up with the technology that's been developed. So a lot of these businesses will get to a certain point and say, okay, now we're funded, we've developed what we developed, but we're really struggling to find that long-term contract with the government that has the funding, because it still needs to be set aside. And that's a process that can take years sometimes with a brand new technology. We had a gentleman on that was talking about commercialization. He's like, hey, I've listened to these, and he goes, this is where commercialization is extremely important. He goes, because his take, and I'd like to hear what your commentary would be on it, was he looks at SBIR as almost a venture capital fund that he could use to develop his technology, where he still retains ownership of his business. And just understanding that commercialization and dual use is part of this. He's like, when you get to that point, he said he pivots to commercial use. Like, now I have the thing, I'm selling it commercially, and I use that stream of revenue to keep me going until the government funding catches up.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that as a strategy for a business?
I think I look at it the exact same way. Every dollar I can raise from the government is one less dollar I have to raise from private investors. So KEF, I'm always willing to talk. Full disclosure, I can tell you all our numbers if you'd like. So the only money we've raised was a friends and family investment round. We did that after we were in that Lockheed Martin competition and after we'd had our first contract. So, we tried to get money and get validation before raising money.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I look at it as, actually, we found the government to be so fast moving between SOFWERX, AFWERX, and the Army Applications Lab that in my, role as CEO, I have to find the cheapest dollars. I look at the government as a better, preferable funder to venture capital right now. Yeah. They're more patient. They're moving just as fast, if not faster, and they don't take ownership of our business. Sure. So pretty obvious call that I should work with them as long as the dollars are flowing quickly.
And that's huge.
But yeah, I see a potential, not valley of death, but a potential valley coming up where we want to wean ourselves off the SBIR process. Not because it hasn't been good to us, but just because we want to grow beyond it, kind of scale beyond it. And so in 23, we'll be selling our first software licenses to actual US businesses.
Okay.
So that's the model we're going towards is, we sell our software per seat, per aircraft. You pay us X $1,000 for it. And then, the aircraft now has a new performance upgrade that it didn't have before. You can navigate without GPS.
Interesting. And is that the same model you're going to use with the government, if you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
So, to date, we've just advanced entirely on research grants. So SBIRs and that type of grant, it's all been, fund our research, advance the technology. But what we're going to shift towards is, now you don't have to pay us for the development, but you pay us for the software.
Right.
And then we take that money and we still do our R&D and make the software better and hopefully grow. But that's the valley we want to get across. And it's going to take us, at least 3 years to get off SBIRs. And maybe we never fully do.
Yeah.
Because we could still use them to fund new advancements in our tech in this key area or that key area and get, kind of like that market validation before we do internal research and development. Mm-hmm. But it would be, not 100% of our revenue. It'd be something like 20-30% of it.
Sure. Yeah, and no, and I kind of key on that because the licensing model is a good one. for a business that's selling to the government, and I won't speak to commercial, but I assume it's the same there, because it can, can bring in recurring revenue. Maybe it's a lower cost up front for the government, versus, buying like an enterprise, license or inserting something permanently. But it also gives them, access to the benefits of the fact that you are dual use, right? So now you have all of these customers, both defense and, government defense and commercial, which are putting money into your company. You guys are improving and making the updates to the software. And then the government gets to benefit from a lot of those updates, I would imagine, if
Yeah.
it worked like some of the other models. And I saw from the government side what happens if you don't have that, right? So some of the legacy aircraft that I would have to, whether I was flying them or whether I was actually in charge of the acquisitions unit supporting them, what would happen is you'd have a software suite that was developed for that system and just for that system. And the problem on the government side is, well, now if we ever need an update, that means the government has to get a contract with this company, pay them to do the update. Then they have to do the update. Then you get it. And then by the time you get it, you might need something else. And it's like that you're constantly playing this game where I feel like the benefit's better for both the government and the business if you have this dual use continuing model. And then the licensing model, certainly, like I said, that can provide you that sustained funding over years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, as you were talking there, I was thinking, one of the risks for us going forward is that we're somewhat skeptical of the government's prowess at acquiring software.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of like hardware is what we understand, and they want that software to be embedded on it. So I think we're getting on the GSA schedule now. That's
Mm-hmm.
like a push we're doing so they can procure it off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's some risk there that even though we have a good product, it's hard for them to acquire. So at the same time, we're developing, in some cases for government specific aircraft, but often for aircraft that are commercially available that they've purchased. So, we might work through those commercial vendors to kind of package up our software before the government buys it.
Sure. And I mean, they do both, right? So, and that's just, I think, needs to be understood going into it. I don't know if you guys have looked at open mission systems and UCI. It's something that you may want to take a look at as you move. So open mission system just is something I worked on in the government. I'm involved with now to a certain extent when I'm going to conferences and working with people. And basically what we're talking about is, the government has all these, whether we're talking about aircraft or ground-based systems, right? But you pick, from the F-35 to, kind of more of the ancient aircraft that we've flown, like the B-52 coming to now. But typically, an OEM, one of the big defense contractors, would put that aircraft, they'd win the contract, they'd put it together. And if the government wanted to make any change to that system, put your software on, for instance, nope. The OEM, first of all, the OEM doesn't want your software on there, but they own it completely. And to get them to make a change, it's almost like working with another government organization, right? These big companies, it takes time. Maybe it's not as good, and the money it's going to cost, not 100, but it might cost 10 times as much to get a product that's not as good, right? And so what we would see is we'd have these startups and these new technology companies, and I'm in Boston, right? So we're always working with MIT and some of the great minds around here, and they have something, we want to put it on a system, can't do it, right? So what OMS does, this is where the Air Force is going, and I think a lot of the other services, where we are going to have an open systems that the government owns, and it allows a company like yours, for instance, to be able to put something together if you follow the parameters that we set forth, that everybody, so we have these consortiums that everyone kind of has agreed on, what that's going to look like. So they can build things according to those parameters. UCI stands for Universal Command and Control. And essentially it's a code, a language that you can understand. And then, so what you put together can communicate with the weapon system and everything else that's connected to it. So it still has a ways to go, but something like yours, especially, I would think would want to be at least aware of that, of OMS and where we're going and who's using it. So.
Yeah, that's actually, so as you were talking about it, we are somewhat familiar with that. Sometimes I've heard the term MOSA, I think stands for Modular Open System Architectures, and maybe that's more Army or maybe that's more somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of my belief is what should happen is the government should own the interface. And you should have a competitive market for vendors who can meet the needs of that interface. And if the government just maintains that and they give you, here 3 years down the road, here's what the interface is going to be evolving to. It's kind of like the standards that industries kind of organized around for data transfer and software interfaces. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. And then yeah, hopefully KEF's the best team in, visual nav. That's what we hope.
Yeah.
And we can compete against, say, Lockheed or somebody, a big company with, because we have a new approach.
Or like you mentioned earlier, or you could sub to them, right? So, and that happens too, where they take a look at you and say, hey, these guys have a great product or solution. And by the way, they also understand maybe if OMS applies to that, or, hey, you guys have that understanding as well. So now you're a sub to them going in, and companies do it both ways, right? So whether you're subbing to a Lockheed or you're a prime and we're just working directly with the government, I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. And then I just want to say one thing for anyone listening, when you think about the licensing, I think maybe you were alluding to it, which is sometimes the government doesn't want to buy software licenses because if the government, if it's not a program of record and it's not like this funding where, hey, I have 5 years of funding to put KEF on contract, right? I might have follow funds, right? And this is where the government buys a lot of different things, right? So let's say my office has 15 million in fallout funds, and I know that KEF's at the top of my list. I need to get this on a certain, maybe whether it's a demo or whether it's on a weapon system or, whatever the exact project is. But I might only have that money for this year. I don't know if I'm going to have it next year. So do you want to sell a 1-year license are they going to buy a 1-year license knowing that they need it but that's where hey, I could sell you a 3-year license. I can sell you a 5-year license. So sometimes you can get around it that way, but I just want people listening to understand that there are different things that you can do, and there are different problems that you'll encounter if it's a licensing model versus if you're just coming in on a project.
Yep.
Cool. We've covered a lot. This has been an amazing episode. I think that for anyone going after a cyber contract, especially, they're going to be they got a lot of great tips for you, especially on that proposal writing process. So we've talked a lot. What's next for you guys? What do you have coming up, and what do you want people to know about KEF?
What's coming up for us in 23 is that transition to our first licenses. So we hope to be doing that October Q4 of this year. We're doing a ton of demos. If you look at our website, we only release like half of our kind of cool stuff on our website, but we're doing a lot of flying at night right now, a lot of fast flying. We think we're carving out a really cool niche, getting on our real products that hopefully are serving, overseas, pretty soon. So we hope we're making that leap to being a kind of what I would consider almost a real business, a real provider of valuable software.
Great. No, that's awesome. And if someone wants to reach out to you, so small business or government, and they had a question or just wanted to talk to you, what would be a good place to go find you guys?
Well, I'll give you my email if that's okay.
I think that's fine at this point. We don't have 5 million people listening, so
Well,
we get a few emails.
I'll say I respond to our contact us email. So if you write to contact us at kef.robotics.com, those will come to my inbox, and we don't get enough email traffic that I'll miss many emails. So there's that. There's LinkedIn. I do check LinkedIn at least probably once a week because I'm doing outreach or whatever myself on LinkedIn, even though I don't love it. But yeah, we're a small business. We're easy to get a hold of. Got a good, pretty up-to-date website run by our COO here. So
she's doing great. It looks like an awesome website. And
she's doing great.
I'll put, she needs a raise, by the way. And
she does. Yep. She's actually typing me that email now.
Oh, fantastic. Well, hey, maybe once you get your next contract here, we could get a little extra for. I'm going to put the email, I'm going to put your website in the show notes so people can just click on that. And then usually I ask, what would your recommendation be to a small business that's thinking about getting into this, maybe a technology company, but what would you say?
Stay lean, travel a bunch. Don't be afraid of anything. Worst somebody can say is no. You got to get in front of people. You got to keep emailing them. In the DoD, you'll get a lot of non-responses, and you can't take that personally. You can't think they don't like you. You just have to keep bugging them until they give you some time.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Fraser, I really appreciate it.
There we go. Okay, ready? Hey guys, Ricky here with DoDContract.com. This was a great interview with KEF Robotics. They had some amazing tips on how to win those SBIR contracts. I'm sitting here with my 4-year-old son, Zachariah. Zach, what did you think of this episode? It's amazing. All right. Well, you do get your ice cream now, buddy. Thanks for that. Head on over to DoDContract.com if you want to learn more about these contracts, about how you can go through the process to win contracts for yourself. Or, like a lot of CEOs, you don't have time for training and you just want it done for you. We have a few programs for you too. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this episode. Please leave a review and we will see you next week.